So I love MMOs, I love RPG games, and so does a lot of people that watch this show. And it's great to see the innovations made for a lot of these games that come out. But at the same time, people are always asking for something new, something different. So like when you played EverQuest, people want to see more dynamic guilds. They want to see more dynamic end game content. People play like City of Heroes because it was different. And it's really cool what we're going to be talking about today, Albion Online, because not only are you able to play on like PC, Mac, Linux, but also on your phone. So it's kind of different because you have those games that you have the RPGs, sometimes the building games that are really popular, and now you're mixing like an MMO content into it. So we're going to be talking with Christopher Hombergs today, and he's from Albion Online, and we're also going to be talking to author Peter Newman, who is writing one of the companion books and also writes for Albion Online. So I want to thank you guys for coming and joining with us today.
Thanks for the invitation.
Hello.
I've been looking at your bio and the different things that you wrote, and it's kind of really cool because, you know, like with the Vagrant, that was the first novel that you've got published, right? That was your first one?
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
So, I mean, I always think that's really cool because a lot of people, you know, I've been part of writing groups and they talk about what it's like to actually get to that point. And most of the people there have done like self-publishing and things like that, where in your case, you've got this first one out, you know, it's fancy as well, and it's really good. I've seen the reviews that people have done on it. What did it feel getting that first one out?
Oh, I mean, it's incredible. It's wonderful. It's very slow as well, because obviously the joy of self-publishing is that you can get something out relatively quickly. I mean, I signed my deal at the beginning of 2014, so like January 2014. And the book came out in the UK in April 2015, and it's going to come out in the US in May this year. So, you know, these things take a long time, but no, it's fabulous. It's wonderful and really exciting. And, you know, I think people, when they think about writers, they think about people alone, you know, in a little room. And that is true a lot of the time. I am alone in my little room. We're trying to work out, you know, what's going to happen in this story. But one of the nice things with getting published by Harper Voyager is that you then have a team alongside you as well. So, you know, you've got your editor and you've got, you know, the people in marketing, publicity, and your cover person and all that. And it's, yeah, it's great.
So, Christopher, are you able to hear us now?
Yes, I'm back. I'm terribly sorry again.
Oh, no problem at all. So my question was, with the changes that have come to MMOs, like we've seen where you had the pay model, like you were paying $12, $15 a month, and you would play these games and people loved it. And then all of a sudden you had this influx of other games. I remember in EverQuest when you had Dark Age of Camelot come out, and then the question became, are people going to be willing to pay to play this game? Then you had the free-to-play model after you had so many MMOs come out. With Albion Online, you have it where you can play online on your computer, but then also on phones, which is unique. Can you just tell us about, you know, developing so that people can play on both formats?
Of course, naturally, it's quite a challenge to develop something that is playable both on PC and mobile devices. Generally, we don't officially support phones, but rather tablets, because even with all the optimizations you put into it, a 5-inch screen just not necessarily cuts it, and you can't see enough. So we recommend having at least 7 inches to play on, and then it actually is pretty nice to sit just in the subway and play a little, just gather some stuff. And yeah, that was the vision we had from the very beginning, and from there we would just build upon it, meaning that everything needed naturally to be tailored towards this experience. So we chose a comic-y art style because, you know, even with relatively little details and graphical effects, a comic style always looks great. For example, if you take World of Warcraft, which stuck to its sort of comic-y style for ages and thus was able to be played on even low-end computers, made a great prototype for everything in coming after that. And that's the art side. And naturally, all the coding needs to be as optimized and concise as possible to draw as little on resources as you can somehow imagine, which of course is a challenge, but a very exciting one.
Now, for people that may not be familiar with the game, can you just set up like the world and what players can expect when they do get into the game?
Of course. Albion Online is a open world, hardcore, full loot PvP sandbox game. And now that I threw all the buzzwords out there, let me get into it a bit. You have a very open world consisting of, at the moment, somewhere about 220 clusters, meaning individual maps, where you can roam freely. You have 4 different safety zones, which basically define, can I be killed there or not? For example, if somebody played Eve, think of high sec, low sec, zero sec, meaning from a very Care Bear progression where nothing can happen to you, but some wolves jumping out of the woodwork and biting you, up till a full Zerg of 20 people just can come out of anywhere and kill you and take your stuff. That all is fueled by a completely player-driven economy, meaning anything that can be acquired in the game is also crafted by somebody. So there's no uber loot from raid bosses or anything. So everything needs to go through gatherers who need to gather the resources, to crafters who then create the armor and the weapons, and towards you, the player, who then utilizes these weapons. And here comes the kicker. We totally abandoned any class system, meaning that the equipment you currently wear defines what you're able to do. Meaning you can happily switch from a full-plate sword wielder to a nimble frost mage within seconds, if you have spent time playing it and unlocking the necessary skill to, equip the higher level equipment. So what else is to do? We have a very, very strong focus on PvP, as I said, and that's on the one hand the open world PvP, where you just really roam and get to engage other people, and then we also have different sorts of guild versus guild battles. We have a very strong group and guild focus, meaning guilds can hold territories and even cities and need to defend them. Those territories give them access to resources, to dungeons, to a lot of things, where they can also place buildings and craft stuff. And of course, other guilds will want to take that away, and need to defend that. So with that focus of PvP and open player-driven economy, there's a very, very interesting symbiosis happening between particularly those two groups.
And as far as the story itself, Peter, I know that with you being a writer, and I read in your bio, like, you grew up with tabletop games, playing RPGs, things like that. What was it about Albion Online's story? And I know that you're writing Landfall for that, and it's going to incorporate not only the story of the game, but even players within the game, which sounds really awesome. But can you just tell us about the lore and like what brought you to the project in writing Landfall?
Yeah, sure. Essentially, Albion or Sandbox came and approached me after having seen the Vagrant, and we sort of began talks from there. What drew me to the project was that, as you say, I grew up playing computer games and playing role-playing games, and I think I've said before, if someone had said to teenage me, what would be your ideal job, I'd be like, well, making up stories for computer games clearly would be the best job ever. So it was one of those things that I kind of grabbed with both hands when the opportunity came along. In terms of, sorry, was that your question? Was there anything else you?
Yeah, just as far as like creating the story and the lore of Albion Online.
Okay, so that was really interesting, because when I came to Albion, the game had been in stages of development for some years. So it wasn't like a blank canvas or me sitting down saying, well, this is the kind of world I would like to do. They said to me, right, we've got these bits of the world, and a lot of things already existed. Some of the factions were already in place, game mechanics, the UI of the game, and all that kind of stuff was already down. People were already starting to play the game. So what I was coming along to do really was to say, well, okay, let's look at how all of these things fit together. It's a bit like if you're given a jigsaw with half the pieces in place, and they say these pieces have to be here, but all these other gaps you can do what you want with. And so I guess there were two sides to my job really. One was to find the gaps and fill them in, and the other was to join up the pieces that already existed. and think about why they were there, think about what their history was. So if we know that two factions are at war with each other, well, why? Why are they at war? What's the history? What's gone on beforehand that we can kind of play with as we go through? And obviously, part of doing that, it threw up new ideas that we then discussed that started to get worked into things as well. I think you asked, what drew me. I think one of the things that really excites me is the interplay between the story and the kind of the history of the world and the game itself and the players, and how each can influence the other in some way. I find that really exciting.
Yeah, what's interesting when I looked at some of the game videos was that you had that building creating aspect, and like Christopher was saying, as far as creating with crafting and stuff like that, you always have people in MMOs have that battle, because I remember in games like even World of Warcraft, even EverQuest back in the day, you had armor that you could create, but for the most part everyone was concerned about getting the loot from the bosses. But
Mm-hmm.
here you have that mix of having people create things, and you have the gathering aspect that a lot of people who play like the tablet games really like. I guess, Christopher, as far as keeping people engaged, because that seems to be the problem. You have these games that come out, like I think about WildStar, where people flock to it at first, and it was like, wow, this game's awesome, and they're playing it, and then when you get to that third, fourth month, people start to leave. What do you guys have in the works that's going to keep people engaged so that they can stay for the long haul?
Well, naturally, it's always a problem, especially if any new contender has to compete with, the established MMOs like World of Warcraft and EVE that have been iterated for 10 or even more years. Any new contender contestant has, of course, troubles. But our take concerning, especially the PvP part, is pretty unique. I think this openness is, especially considering this cross-platform approach is something that hasn't been done before, and from what I've read in our community, people are so loving, just engaging in this very active playstyle of PvPing. But then again, that can't be everything to a game. Of course, the hardcore PvPers are a very strong and important faction, but they don't carry a game alone. So naturally, we want to create a full experience for every playstyle as far as that's possible. That means that we will be overhauling the world a bit to make it more suited to different playstyles. We will end up with having the hardcore PvPers drawn to certain areas where they can do their GVG fights, and the not so hardcore PvP players who don't really need to be there don't get ganked all the time, because at the moment it's just whoever brings the numbers wins the fight. So let's call them Care Bear is weary to actually head out into the world and explore, because they know that somebody stronger and better will be waiting there. The world rebuilding is one step. Secondly, there will be a crime and punishment system, meaning if you constantly kill players that are flagged as friendly, you will run into problems in the long term and can't enter any safe cities, for example. That will keep those gang squads a bit out of harm's way, and make the Care Bears happy, which will then have way more areas to explore, since it will be a more interesting world. We're adding biomes, for example, swamps, grasslands, mountains, which means that the certain resources, for example, ore and rocks, can be primarily found in mountains, but you can't find any fiber or wood there. So players will be encouraged to explore more, to see more of the world, and to do different things. And for those that want to do PvE, which of course is always a strong faction, we have already started overhauling our dungeon system and introduced a cool new way called Gateway Dungeon, where several groups fight over, a gateway mob, who then drops a key and opens thus a portal to an instanced dungeon, where this victorious group then can go along and have their PvE fun. In the future, we'll also add expeditions, which are, sort of the same. If you find a key for an expedition, like a map or a token, you can then head out into this expedition with your group and enjoy PvE content there without the fear of other interjection. And for PvPers, of course, we will want to give more playground. For example, freestanding structures, stuff that give resources if you conquer them, and you can conquer them all the time, and not instead of the currently fixed windows we have for the guild territories. Because of course we want to guilds be able to keep their territories, and if they were attackable 24/7, then people would just come in and sweep them at night. And exactly. And so at the moment it is that guilds can allot certain time slots over the day. They have to allot a certain time number of time slots, and then this territory is attackable. So we have this aspect, and then those freestanding structures will be completely free for all. So everybody gets something to do if they want to.
Yeah, I really like that idea. I remember in playing like Star Wars Galaxies back in the day when you could build your base, you know, there was always people that they would split their guild up between people who were East Coast, West Coast, sometimes in Europe, different, so just so they could have at least someone there to rally the troops. And, you know, it's one thing when you're in high school and you get a phone call and it's like, log on, defend the keep. But yeah, when you're trying to work and you have school and everything else, that doesn't work out. So I like that idea.
Exactly.
As far as the story, Peter, one of the things that's interesting is I like to write myself. I haven't sold anything, so I don't know if I call myself a writer just yet. But when I'm writing a story and it's my own, it seems like it's still a challenge, no doubt. But you have more that you can play with because it's like your own story. When you're writing for an existing world that has its existing lore, there's challenges. Just for people to get an idea, and especially for writers, aspiring writers as well, what was the challenges between writing like your own story, your own world, and then having to write for an existing world?
Okay, so there's sort of pros and cons really to writing for someone else's world. So the nice thing with your own world is, as you know, you can do what you want. No one can tell you what's right or wrong. If you fancy having, I don't know, a giant lizard turn up halfway through the story, you can. If you want to have gravity switch off halfway through the story, you can. Do what you want. But that's also a challenge as well, because all of the creative pressure is on you. Whereas with, say, Albion, you've got a slightly different situation where there are certain things you cannot play with. They are there, you have to treat them as they are. But at the same time, you don't have to think of everything yourself as well. And so what happens quite quickly is, what I found was that because there were certain things in existence, it closed down the options to a point where I'd be able to say, well, it's probably going to be one of these 4 things that I'm going to choose for this next bit of the story. What's the most fun? So in some ways, actually, it made it faster to work in. Even though there's less freedom, you might imagine. Whereas when you've got utter freedom, sometimes you can spend ages thinking, well, I could do anything here. What's it going to be? The other interesting thing about Albion is that if we took, I don't know, a kind of a AAA kind of not MMO title, like something like Assassin's Creed or something like that, where if you were writing a book for that, you probably have a fairly fixed focus. Yeah, you're following this assassin on their journey, etc., etc., and you have to do certain things, and you have a story, and you have a setting, and everything else. Well, Albion, you have the world, but of course there is no one story in Albion. It's not like there's a great evil and we've got to go and fight it and kill it, and that's the end of the story. It is that there are thousands and thousands of stories going on all the time, of individuals and of guilds. So one of the challenges when I first got brought in to write the book was to think, well, how am I going to turn this kind of massive, evolving kind of hydra of stories into something coherent for the reader? What is the story that I'm going to tell there? Because in some ways it's very easy in a story where it is just that, you know, a great evil rises up over the land, our heroes get together, they have some challenges, they kill it, everyone goes home and has tea. Nice, there's a nice structure, that's nice and easy. But of course with Albion, it's not like that at all. So what I had to do was think about what kind of stories I wanted to tell, and ultimately tell stories that are, in some ways, feel like the players' stories, where the characters are arriving on the island, or sorry, on the shores of Albion, I should say, just like the players do, where you've got virtually not, barely any clothes to your name, let alone kit, where you don't really know what you're doing, you don't know what's around, and that very quickly there are going to be threats and other things coming at you, and to play with that. And in the story, there are several kind of main characters or protagonists in the book, and sometimes they are just trying to survive, sometimes they're making things, sometimes they're trying to establish their mark in the world, sometimes they're allies and they work together and they join guilds together and they're friends. And of course, sometimes they're not, and sometimes they betray each other. Sometimes they end up on different sides of the fence, fighting over the same resources. So it's playing with those kinds of ideas, a bit like a player will have in the game, with alliance, with betrayal, with survival, and also with changing the world around them as they do things.
And as far as the cool part where it talks about introducing references to characters and guilds in the game, can you tell us a little bit how that's being brought together? Because I think that's a great idea. Back in the day, like in EverQuest and early World of Warcraft, Dark Age and Camelot, people would write their own stories, and it would be a mixture of the actual story lore with their own story. So people loved that. Now in Landfall, you have a book that actually is bringing some of those references in. So for someone playing the game, it kind of helps with that immersion factor. Can you tell us about like how that works with bringing people who are playing the game guilds into the book?
Yeah, certainly. So one of the things I suppose I was keen for, and I think Sandbox was keen for as well, was that this wasn't just like a book in one corner and the game in the other corner. We wanted these things to have some kind of dialogue between each other. So how did it work? Well, I think Christoph's already mentioned that there's a very loving community in Albion, very engaged players. And funnily enough, you were saying how players like to write their own thing, and there are players, starting to do that already in Albion. And what we were looking at was things that were happening in the alpha tests where guilds were starting to rise up and prove themselves, where players might do funny things, where some people in the community might be particularly active. We were really led by things that the community did, and then things were dropped in. So in the most part, players will not be, a player in the game is not the main character of the book, but it might be that the character will encounter one of the characters from the game, one of the player's characters briefly. Or it might be that when, if you like, the characters in the book are starting to find out about the world, they're going to hear about some of the guilds that are already established that everyone else looks up to, dropped in passing. And so we have things like some of the guilds are referenced by name, some of the characters are referenced, some of them actually come on to, I'll play a significant role in the book. They might help the book characters when they're on their knees and say, I'll show you how it's done. They might just be seen running past in the background. So yeah, it's trying to bring that in. But also, there's talk about things going slightly the other way as well, where things that are in the book might then be findable in the game. Albion works with a system where you can get sort of special items, either of clothing for your character or avatar pictures and things like that. Some of those from the book might start to appear that'll be available to players, so we can do a bit of both. And should there be future books, we would look at what's gone on in the beta, what will go on in the initial play to kind of bring that in again. And I really like the idea that as a player, if you've done something particularly crazy or fun or brilliant, that you could then find yourself in a book because of what you did. I love that idea, as a gamer and as a reader and as a writer.
Yeah, that's really cool to have that aspect, because I could just see where, if maybe you have a guild that is building up in one, especially if, like you said, if there's multiple books, the next thing you know, maybe you could even mention like, oh, well, that guild was there, but now it's no longer there. This guild took over. So I mean, the farther it goes along, it's endless possibilities. So as far as just the game itself, I always hate looking at the negative stuff, because you can nitpick anything, and that's what the internet's all about. But I know that with Albion, when they talked about changing from the free-to-play model to where you buy the game and then it's free, kind of like Guild Wars, there were some, it's like a split. More people seem to really like that idea because it keeps people from coming in and just spamming or doing crazy things or just trolling. But some other people were saying like it's a paywall. I personally, I don't agree with that. I say that if you're getting these aspects of the game, then and it's going to keep out people who might disrupt your game, then paying for the game initially is not a problem. But Christoph, as far as your views on that change where you buy the game and then you get to play, and yeah, you have premium items, but it's nothing that's pay to win. Can you just tell us about that business model?
Yeah, pretty much. it didn't change really much. I mean, the only difference is that at the moment people can buy into the beta and support development by acquiring a founder's pack, and we basically transport this model even to after release, because we found that somebody who has this initial investment into a game is more likely to be an engaged and active player. And of course, as you said yourself, it keeps a lot of the troublemakers out. I mean, how easy is it in a free-to-play game to just troll around, harass people, insult people, and if you get banned, just create a new account? That, of course, you will never entirely get rid of, but you can at least increase the barrier a bit. It also is, to me personally, a sign of quality if a developer goes ahead and says, "Hey, our game is so good, we expect people to pay in to and be able to play the game." And so for me personally, I absolutely welcome this change, because if I look at, for example, Guild Wars, who they adapted this model and it works perfectly fine for them. And I strongly believe it is possible for us to keep this business model without giving up our premise to be ever introducing any items that give you an edge in combat. That is something we will never ever do, because it would totally, screw up the balance and disrupt everything we believe in.
Yeah, and that I agree. Obviously you can have someone pay and do the same thing, especially if they have mommy and daddy's money. But I do agree that if you have that opening where you buy the game and then you play, it goes forward. Now, I've already seen what's been discussed, that it's not pay to win, and from what I see, what you get with the premium items and stuff, it's not pay to win. But just for the people that are still skeptical and always thinking, oh, there's a premium and all that, can you just tell us about the differences between someone who maybe is not going to spend a lot of money in the game, or maybe not even spend it all, and then someone who says, hey, I want to buy all these things in the game?
Okay, anybody who wants to buy all the things in the game just has a bunch of vanity items that can be, one-time uses like fireworks or placing guild banners, something that looks nice but doesn't really make a difference. That's the sort of items we want to bring in for premium currency. In terms of the optional premium status we offer, that gives you a bit of a boost when it comes to character progression, meaning you gather a bit more, you collect fame, which is our experience, a bit faster, stuff like that. But it's A, not game breaking, B, it does definitely not give you any edge in an actual fight, meaning somebody who has premium does not hit harder or takes less damage. So it will always be the player skill that determines whether somebody comes out victorious. And lastly, which is the kicker, if you're a smart player and invest enough time, you can acquire that premium status by trading in your in-game currency for premium currency, and thus getting the premium status for your character. If you ever played EVE, pretty much like the Plex system there.
Okay, cool. And that's what I saw referenced as well, and a lot of people said that, yeah, in that case, if you can earn these items, what people pay for is if they're just in a rush. So you may have older people who are like, hey, I can't dedicate all this time, so I'll pay a little bit, but that's not really breaking the game or giving anyone some advantage or anything else.
Exactly, but, plus they still need to play the game after all.
Yeah, exactly. All right, so we went through some of the cut and dry regular interview stuff, but I want to get into some of the funnier stuff that I saw. So I guess I'll start with Peter, because when I looked on your blog, I was reading the different things in the interviews, and you mentioned about the other Peter Newman who did Tigra in Thundercats. I want to ask, how many times has someone sent an interview request thinking that you was that guy?
Well, actually, I've never been asked if I am. I've never been asked to interview for someone thinking that I'm him, because it's pretty clear to find. But it's one of those things that when you have a book come out or something like that, sometimes you might look to see kind of if you're appearing on searches and that kind of business. But when you're trying to compete with the guy who was Tiger in Thundercats, that's always going to be a losing race. It's a tough one, because he always pops up everywhere at the top of these things.
Yeah. Yeah, I saw that too. You ever thought about just being like, yeah, just play it off, be like, yeah, that's me?
I mean, well, maybe that could be a new strategy. Like, and I was told, but probably the lawyers would come after me about that point.
Yeah. That's true. As far as just writing itself, I mean, it's strange because I've seen people who've gotten into writing just after seeing like Californication, and they see the Duchovny character being, you know, all brash and with the drinking and all that stuff. And a lot of people get the feeling that, hey, maybe I could be that rock star writer. I mean, did you ever have that goal in mind? Like you're like, hey, I'm gonna play up the writer, like use it to pick up girls or something like that. I mean, I know you're married, but
Well, the thing is, as I say, my first book came out last year, which also happened to be my 10-year wedding anniversary.
oh,
So,
nice.
it would have been pretty controversial if I had started trying to get dates and fame and all these kind of other things through being a writer. And very sadly, being a fantasy writer generally does not make you an instant megastar rock star. There are a couple of them out there. They're very few and far between.
Yeah, we
Probably
need.
George Martin's about it.
Yeah, we need to change that. You know, we need to make more superstars out of people that are bringing these great works to us that we like. Christoph, as far as working in gaming, people have all these different images. I worked for Alienware, and people would say, "Oh, you guys are playing video games all day. It's like a party." And it's like, no, that's not it at all. But at the same time, it's been shown videos, things like that, where some game companies, it's like you look at the work environment and you're like, awesome. Can you just tell us about what it's like just working in gaming?
For me, it's a very pleasant working environment. I mean, you encounter a lot of people, especially working on a fantasy MMORPG, that are just your type of crazy. So you instantly get along with them. Everybody is very friendly and forthcoming. But of course, it's not always a glorious job. It's work after all, and creating a new model, for example, for an art asset, takes time, and it's tedious work to get the proportions right, to get the animation in. Creating a spell, for example, is work till you have the balance right, till you have set it up in the code base, till you have figured out how should it work. And for me, it's a great industry to work in, but it's mainly because of the people and the great product that comes out of it. But in the end, it's probably just a job for the crazy, like any other. You have this. As I said in the beginning, it's the right type of crazy, and you meet a lot of like-minded people there, which of course, in turn, often helps delivering a great product.
As far as dealing just with the public and dealing with fan bases, I know that can be difficult, and I've talked to people who have said, it could be a love-hate relationship. On one hand, you have to be the PR person, where no matter how raging the person gets, you have to come back as a professional. But does it sometimes just, you look at it and what people say, and you say to yourself, oh my God, don't you understand the process that we have to go through, and we can't just throw everything you want out to the fan base?
Of course. I mean, everybody who ever worked in gaming and read what people wrote on the internet came across this thought. I mean, how often are you looking at Reddit and thinking, dude, you didn't really just ask this question, right? And the answer is yes, he asked this question, and yes, he probably meant it serious. But as you said, from a professional point of view, I need to be able to meet him at a professional level, which in some cases, admittedly, is a bit difficult. But if you turn those people around by courtesy and competence, it's also gratifying. But yeah, everybody on the internet is a critic. Everybody on the internet knows how to make it better, faster, and of course cheaper. So yeah, it's something you'll have to live with, but you'll have that in every industry. For example, everybody is a food critic. Everybody knows how to coach a football team. Everybody knows, I don't know, okay, probably not how to fly to Mars, but well, we could shoot a few people to Mars. That might help.
I think the thing I'd like to jump in on here is that people are passionate. They're excited
Absolutely.
about the game coming out, or they're excited about the book coming out, and then if things aren't kind of the way they'd hoped them to be, sometimes that upsets them. And I think as well with the nature of things on the internet, you can respond very quickly. Maybe quicker than you might want to if you really thought about it, but you can do that. And so I think it can be really frustrating and sometimes upsetting when someone is, openly negative or critical or dismissive of what you're doing. But generally, they're doing it from a place of passion for whatever the thing is. And I mean, I think as Christoph was sort of alluding to, I often find when you talk to people who are annoyed about something, often when you start to discuss it with them, that anger very quickly goes away and is replaced by a kind of an understanding or empathy, or I mean, not every time, obviously, but more often than not, people actually they might be just angry because they wanted to play something faster, or because they wanted to, that they thought that there was going to be an option that there isn't. And then when you talk to them about it, they might say, oh, well, I'm not interested, but they'll normally say it in a nice way. So.
Now, on the reviews that I've seen, I mean, it's been like for your book Vagrant, I've seen like a lot of positive, and I know that at some point there's always that one person who says something, and you're just looking at it like, seriously. I mean, I've read books where at the end it was kind of open-ended. They didn't wrap everything up in a pretty little bow, and then someone would write, "They didn't finish the book. They didn't tell us what it was." It's like, did you not understand what it was supposed to be? Have you, like, Peter, for your book, was there something, was there a comment where you read it and you're just like, seriously?
Well, I mean, the thing is that I try not to read like every single review that comes in for the book, partly because it's a subjective thing. As you say, not everyone's going to like it. I've been very lucky in that I've had a lot of positive reviews and a lot of positive feedback. But I've also had a few people who didn't like it, and some of those people have said they didn't like it in a very interesting way. And that's the sort of thing that's only going to put a downer on my day to read. Ultimately, though, and I think it's to some extent, this might be where regular books and games differ slightly, in that when I finish the book, I can't change it. It's out there. It's done. So if someone says, "I don't like the way you ended it," I'm not going to rewrite the ending and republish the book. It's done. It's there. So if they don't like it, it's theirs to like or not like. I'm done once it's out there, and I'm delighted that when people like it. But I can't do anything about it if they don't. But with a game, I suppose you can. If someone said, "I don't like this particular, I don't know, level of the game," you could, in theory, go back and change it. And games evolve all the time. When you look at the whole point of beta testing and everything else, it's to get it right. And sometimes, so I suppose, I don't know. I'm wondering what Christoph would think on this, but I wonder as well in the gaming world if there might be a more kind of that dialogue could be there.
Yeah,
Christoph.
Christoph.
I mean, if one person is shouting in the corner, you might ignore them, but.
Yeah, Christoph, would you say that, as much as you want to get input from fans that can tell you, hey, make these changes, especially in beta and stuff like that, that's where you actually are actively looking for that. But at the same time, you struggle with, well, either we can't put this in or we can't put this in now. And then people will say, well, why'd you take this guy's thing and implement it in the next patch? Where's mine? Do you have that, that battle with all the things that the players want changes for?
Not with all the things, but with many things. Of course, for a passionate player, development never goes fast enough. And with all the things we have planned for Albion for the future, ideally everybody wants everything now because it sounds cool. And different people want different things first. But from a development point of view, actually some things need to be done first before the others can be tackled, because they're building on top of another or stuff like that. So if we do something player A wants, player B is upset. If we do it the other way around, player A is upset. But in the end, ideally everybody is happy, just at different points in time. And sometimes we just can't do any of their suggestions because they're just not matching up with our vision. But generally, we're trying to take as much feedback in as possible and also implement it into the game. And I think we have quite a proven track record of listening to our fans.
What's really cool is, Christoph, like you talked about the different games and things that inspired. Like when I was reading like some of the AMA on Reddit, they were talking about how there was inspirations, like you said, Eve. Not inspirations, but the way it was taken, like comparative to the crafting system. The economy system, and also like how it was inspired by like games like UO. Obviously, there's most of the time when you have someone working in gaming, they have a gaming background. Was there games that you grew up with that you just loved a lot that maybe inspired you to get into gaming?
I don't know where to start answering this question. Frankly, I've been starting to play on the computer since I was probably 3 years old when my older brother decided, hey, it's more fun to place my little brother in front of the Commodore 64 instead of babysitting him. So little Christoph started playing Artillery Duel or Frogger on the Commodore 64 at the tender age of 3. So that's where it started. And from there it went on over a Nintendo with what did I play there? Of course, the Mario games. Turtles on the Super Nintendo, Mario Kart, onwards to the PC, where I spent way too many hours playing Transport Tycoon, Colonization, all the good classics. And as soon as online gaming started to pop up, of course, I was in my high school years then, and of course everybody played shooters, so I started playing shooters. Did that quite a lot, probably too much to be good for me, but yeah, different story. And then the MMOs started coming out. I started out with Dark Age of Camelot, really, and yeah, since then I was hooked. The possibilities of Dark Age of Camelot, from what it already achieved in, what was it, 2000, I think, when it came out, then iterating over Star Wars Galaxies. How much time did I put into the entire freedom that Star Wars Galaxies offered you, especially if you wanted to just, live in a game, stuff like that. So yeah, I've been playing MMOs for more than 16 years, and working with games is something that I thought, hey, I could do that. That sounds fun. And yeah, it is fun. Of course, it's, as I said earlier, it's still work, but you work alongside other people who have these same beliefs, visions, and ideas as you. And it's just, in many cases, it becomes more than a work relationship, but a friendship. So that's very, very special to me, and I never regret a single minute I spent here.
And Peter, I know I read about how you grew up playing tabletop games, and that's even where some of your writing started in the beginning, is creating characters and things like that. Can you tell us about some of the games you played? I saw like D&D, of course. Can you tell us about like the games you've played and things that you've written that kind of led later on to you writing books?
Yeah, I mean, I think a bit like Christoph, I sort of, I spent a lot of my youth playing computer games and also playing role-playing games, and yeah, I mean, D&D, as you say, a lot of kind of variants of superhero systems, so champions and GURPS and things like that. Amber, I've got a lot of time for that. This is diceless role-playing. Things like Vampire the Masquerade, various kind of live role-play stuff. I've run around the woods in costume with a latex sword plenty of times.
Oh, you LARPed!
Yeah, I've done that small scale. I've done that large scale as well. So all that kind of stuff that I've done. I mean, funnily enough, my wife's a writer, and her books. She's running a LARP set in the world of her books, which is going to be like a masked ball that's happening this year. So we're still doing it now, really. It hasn't really stopped. I think when I was, I remember reading the Dragonlance books years and years ago, and probably like a lot of people who read that, it was like, oh, that came out of a role-playing game. I play role-playing games. I could just write my role-playing game up, and it would be a massively successful novel as well. And the truth is, generally, it won't. So, I mean, I certainly had a crack along those lines, but yeah, that was back in the early days. And I think, your question was kind of, how the role-playing led into the writing. And I think where that does happen is when you're running games, you're thinking about story and plot and character, and that's definitely true. But I think where people make the mistake is things that are really fun in a role-playing game are not necessarily really fun for the reader. And the same is true with computer games. So, for example, if I'm playing a computer game and it's a car chase game, and I'm driving the car, I can do that for hours and love it. But if I read a book that was just hours and hours of car chase, I'd be really, really bored.
Yeah.
And if you think in a computer game as well, you often fight the same kind of opponent with very slight variations endlessly. But again, if you're reading that in a book, and then Goblin number 75 came round the corner, and the hero killed him, and only needed to kill 10 more, and he would level up. You know, it's like, oh wow, that would be the dullest thing in the world. So yeah, I think there are crossover, but you also have to see the differences too.
Yeah, I could imagine. It's like, and he killed the rat, then walked 3 paces and killed another rat, and he looted the rat, and there was a rat
Yeah.
tail. Why there wasn't the rest of the rat? Who knows? But that's all
Yeah.
he got.
And also that whole thing in a lot of, I played, I remember sort of Final Fantasy and Phantasy Star and all those kind of things I used to play as growing up, and you'd often go into people's houses and just loot their chests, like random villagers. You're supposed to be the hero of this place. You go in, you take Granny's life savings out of the chest, you walk off again and buy a new sword, and it was just so, when you think about it, it doesn't make any sense in a book. And I guess that was one of the things. When I was writing the Albion novel, was wanting it to feel like the computer game world, but also for it to make sense. So I didn't want it to feel like jarring, like why are these people, I don't know, spinning around on the spot for no reason, or jumping up and down for no reason. But I did want it to feel like that world, so if you played the game and you read the book, that the kind of plants you're seeing, or the kind of animals, or the way people sometimes do things, you've got, oh yeah, I've done that, I've seen that. Or I remember having to do that for the first time, all that kind of thing.
Now, I gotta ask you about this, because when I read this in one of the interviews, I was like, oh, this is gonna be something that can maybe start a little flame war between one group or another. When you talked about like favorite RPGs, and people talked about Skyrim, and then you were like, well, Skyrim's great, but I feel that the best was Dragon Age, and oh man, I could just imagine people right now, because I know people are like huge Skyrim fans, and they would be like, are you kidding me? So I want you to defend yourselves. Tell us why Dragon Age was the one for you.
Okay, I get the feeling like you're trying to get me into trouble here. Like, I'll leave my house and there's an army of Skyrim. So I liked Skyrim. I enjoyed it. And I liked the whole kind of exploration aspect of it and how big it was, and all that was great. And I spent many happy hours in Skyrim. But the thing that it didn't have for me were the characters. And I didn't feel maybe as connected to the story. I loved stomping around the world. I loved getting new skills. But there's always that thing, where you're like champion of the world. You run the Fighters Guild and you're the master mage of the land and you've saved the world from dragons. And some guy is shouting at you because they want, I don't know, you to fetch a wine bottle from the nearby store. And you're like, I'm the most important person in this entire universe and you're moaning at me. It kind of broke the... And if you program Skyrim, please don't get angry with me. I love the game, but that was just for me as a player. That was a thing, and I guess as a lover of story, Skyrim did that much more for me, and also just the characters felt more defined and more interesting. And I like the fact that you had the kind of the dialogue options that felt much more integrated in that game. And in some ways, it felt very Skyrim actually. But I was exploring relatively large locations. But it just felt that the people around me were more meaningful, and therefore what I did was more meaningful as well. Funnily enough, I'm playing The Witcher 3 at the moment, because I'm always a bit slow to get to games, which again I'm very impressed by. In terms of not feeling, in a lot of games it's like collect me 5 rat tails, and there's a game where it feels actually like everything feels much more like real people asking for real things, which I've got a lot of time for.
So as far as the game itself, Albion Online, Christoph, people have seen like the changes. I was reading about like what people were looking for, and people saying, oh, I want to be able to have a UI that's more customized and things like that. And I saw in the patch updates, what development updates, that there were changes coming, quality of life, things like that. So for people who are thinking about getting into this game, or people who are already existing in the game, playing the beta and stuff like that, can you tell us about some of the changes that fans have been looking forward to that should be coming out over the next months?
I could easily sum it up under more of everything. Giving a clear timeline in a beta is always a bit tricky, so I can't really put more dates to the individual items than what we have already. We just know that what we want to do by release, and we're still figuring out what the ideal order of implementation will be. So it still is a bit iffy, but definitely I'm looking forward to this world rework because at the moment, I mean, I'm more of a Care Bear player, I admit it. It's sometimes a bit tricky to, just stroll out into the world, grab me those resources. I need to craft my next sword and, come back as a corpse. That's sometimes a bit, frustrating. And with the world changes, this will enable me personally as a Care Bear player and particularly a crafter. I mean, in Star Wars Galaxies and Eve, I haven't done basically nothing else but crafting. That's the thing that I look forward to. The PvP faction will, of course, look forward to the that they get to have more meaningful PvP about those open world structures, those lumber mills, whatever we will put into the game, where they can do decent fights all the time without having to wait for the correct slot timer in our GVG battles. The PvE faction naturally will look forward to more Hellgates, more dungeons, more and elaborate boss fights, and as you said, quality of life. A beta is always for polishing, meaning squishing bugs and making everything more convenient. I mean, we took a bit of a self-ironic approach when we finally introduced a repair all button to, enable players to just click on something and all their gear was repaired instead of having to repair every item at the same after another. And that's a lot of things that, seem to be pretty easy to do, but not necessarily are all the time, but give a great value to the player. And we aim to do a lot more along those lines.
So players can go right now and they can still purchase like the Founders Pack and they can sign up as well. Like, is there going to be another opportunity where players can get into beta besides the Founders Pack?
No, at the moment there is nothing planned. I mean, some Twitch streamers, for example, do giveaways every now and then, but in general, the normal way is to acquire a Founder Pack and just play away. And if people are hesitant, I always say, guys, look more Twitch videos, look at the YouTube videos. There's tons and tons of stuff out there. And if you're still uncertain, grab the lowest tier of Founders Pack and then go from there. If you like the game, you can always upgrade. If you want the good stuff, meaning more premium currency, more items for you and the likes. But in general, I think the initial investment of $30 for a Veteran Founders Pack is given for an MMO that will never require you to pay another buck again if you don't want to. Is not too much.
And Peter, as far as your first book that got released, Vagrant, I know it's out in the UK, and you said that it'll be coming to the US in May. Is that correct?
That's right, yeah. And
where can people find that?
Well, it's going to be. You can find it on Amazon. You can find it in a lot of good bookshops. I would think in the US when it comes out, it'll be in places like Barnes and Noble. It'll be Amazon US. It'll be if you search for it online, it will come up quite easily. So no problems there. Sorry.
Oh no, I was gonna say, and as far as Landfall, it's gonna be coming out in February, both as an ebook and also as paperback, right?
Yes, that's right. In fact, I would imagine be announcements coming out very, very, very soon, and there'll be things like samples and that kind of thing available soon as well. So yeah, not long to wait at all for the novel. And from my point of view, it's all done. It's written. It's edited. It's proofread. It's there. So yeah, there's no chance of it not happening. It is done, and it will appear very, very soon, literally in the next couple of weeks.
Awesome. Well, I just want to thank you guys, Christoph, Peter, for coming on and talking to us about the world of Albion Online, about writing, about the books. It's really been a great conversation. So thanks again for coming on and talking with us.
Thanks for having us. It's been a blast.